All right. Well, thanks for coming out. Thanks for coming to KernelCon. Hopefully check-in was good for you, and hopefully the conference has been good for you so far. I've given a talk kind of like this at our monthly DC 402 talks in December. I've taken it expanded a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you about Google Takeout and what that is and why it's fun. So who am I? Bruce Potter always says, like, why should you listen to me? You probably shouldn't, right? I'm not an expert. But I've worked as a threat actor for about a decade. I caught threat actors for about another 7-8 years. Now I advise CEOs and CISOs on their cyber programs. In the free time, I like to datify all the things, as it says up here, right? At my kid's career day recently, a kid goes, "What do you do outside of work?" And I said, basically the same thing, just for fun. Like this talk, you know. So without hesitation, I said that. So, and spend time with my kids. But I like to share knowledge. So Google, unsurprisingly, tracks a lot. That's how they make money. That's what they do, right? And that's how lots of companies are. If you're not paying for a product, you are the product, right? So, but they'll let you know mostly what they've got. They've created Google Takeout as a way to get your data into and out of Google back in 2011. Originally, it consisted of 5 data sources. Now they offer exports from 58 of the different Google products that they provide. So we're going to kind of explore some of those. So this is just kind of shows you a little bit about Google Takeout. Unfortunately, there's no API to it. You have to get to it through a web page. I'm sure you could get around that. But it allows you to download your data. Here's my water. And possibly in different formats as well, right? So you could do it in a JSON format. And every time I see JSON, I immediately think of put in Elasticsearch. So in my talk here, we're going to focus on a few of the exports from Google here. The My Activity one and these different product categories, Google Pay, search, and then location history. So the My Activity part, when it's exported as JSON, each activity has special bits that you have to pull out. So it comes in JSON blobs, and I'll show you kind of some blobs later. This is kind of some of the code. So if you're looking at Google Assistant data, I want to pull out the voice command. I want to know what my most common voice commands are, right? So for each type of product, I pull out little different bits. You know, Google Pay, I convert it to, you know, US dollars and stuff like that. I have to-dos for my future project stuff, right? So, and all these activities also have geolocation data in them. Lots of them do in a certain format, and so there's just code there to pull. So first we'll look at Google Pay, right? So I use Google Pay for everything. I've used Tap to Pay for years. Here we can, so if you graph this over time, you can see the average payment amount per 30 days, max payment amount, sum over 30 days, and count of payments, right? So you can see in COVID on the far left there, my spending was way down, and it's picked up since I started to go out and about. The interesting bit here is when you map this data out, right? So every point you have in your Google Pay data comes with a payment amount and a location. They don't tie it back to like a vendor or whatever, which is, I don't know why. You could tie it to my credit card data project. But so if you kind of map this out, you do this, right? And you enhance, and you get down to like the Omaha level, and you see where you're spending your money at, and you enhance even further, and you can identify exact places where you spend money, right? So Target, I spend a bunch of money. Go to Tasty Pizza every week. That's my weekly pizza. Office Depot, I do manufacturer spending for credit card miles. That's another thing I do, and that's why that's another hotspot on my stuff. So that's kind of Google Pay, and you could do a lot more with it. Just kind of about these. So next up is Google Assistant. So every time I talk to Google Assistant, which is 18,000 plus times within the last 10 years that they've been doing this, I use it a lot. So I have a home, a Nest, a phone, everywhere, right? So it logs the voice command. Not only does it like log the voice commands, and these are my top commands, top 17, top 20 or whatever, so you can see turning off lights, weather, calling sister. I have kids, so playing Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift and stuff like that is on the list there. So it takes a lot when you put this data out there, and it's like, well, this could be embarrassing, but you always have an excuse, so that's nice. Not only does it record the voice command, it records an audio snippet of your command. So you can actually download every audio command that you've given to Google Voice. It's kind of interesting. So if I want to go and hear what my kids are talking about. Speaking of which, you know, my kids are pretty nice to Google, right? Sometimes I get frustrated with it. So you can see my daughters, thank you, Google. No thanks. We were not talking to you, but thank you for answering, you know. And so you have these conversations with these things. And sometimes I went through and looked for funny words, and here's a came up with my kids, right? And because it's Elasticsearch, like I saw Lewis is going to the pooper. That's my kid. And I was like, what was the conversation that led up to this? And so you just search documents around there, right, in Elasticsearch like you would for security events, and you find the whole conversation of what's going on, right? So it's kind of Google Assistant. There's a lot more things you can do with that. Also, you map out where you use Google Assistant at, right? And then if you zoom in, you can look, hey, at that place, at that time, I did Navigate the Dragon's Lair comics, and you can see everywhere where I've used Google Assistant over the years. So you can look at all this data for your Google. And I mentioned the voice recordings as well, right? So it keeps voice matches. Like when you do, like Google, you can walk up to it and you don't have to say, "Hey Google," if it knows your voice, if it knows your face, so your image recognition of face and all that stuff, you can download everything it uses for its training and the voice command. Kind of an interesting thing. Google, I don't know if you knew this, but they do search as well. That's kind of their bread and butter. And so they record every single Google search you do ever. So history of some of the things I was looking for. I've done 52,000 Google searches in the last 5 years. The top 10 things I search for on a regular basis. And a graph of how many I do over time, right? So this is per 30 days. I average 28 Google searches a day. You don't really think about how much you use these services until you look at the data and see how much you use these services, right? Every time you open an Android app, I'm a Pixel user as well. Every time you open up an Android app, it marks that activity as an activity, and it marks like the full com.samsung. Yada 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 of every single app. So in this data's only been around for about 2 years, at least that they show. So I don't know if that came in like Android 11 or something like that, where they started doing that. But I've opened up an app 49,000 times in the last 2 years, and this is kind of some of my top 10 ones. This is percentages excluding other, so other is probably like 80% of this stuff, but it's just kind of interesting to look at this, right? And as I said, you can see I'm a very avid Google user. Most of my top 10 apps are Google apps. I also use YouTube TV, and so YouTube TV, you can map out, your viewing history. You can see what shows you watch the most. You can map out all these different things, right? So it's kind of interesting. You can do this, and not only just for YouTube TV, but also YouTube. What videos do you watch the most? What YouTube channels do you watch the most? All these different things. I have dashboards to look at all this different data. So that's kind of the Google Assistant My Activity stuff that we look at, and this is just 5 of the My Activity things. I think there's like 30 different My Activity things. I use Google Voice, so I have all the text messages and stuff mapped out into Elasticsearch for easy searching and all these different things. So I like my data to be accessible. And going into location history, this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, right? So there's a 1.5 gigabyte JSON file of 2.4 million data points since 2013 in the last 10 years of my location history as told by Google. So that averages 640 points a day, or about 1 point every 2 minutes, all the time, which is just incredible to think about. This is kind of what a blob of it looks like. This is the JSON, right? And so, again, when I see this, I think Elasticsearch and put it in there. Just kind of as the battery charging, the OS level, and like all these different data points you can put in here. Altitude, velocity. It puts in Wi-Fi details about the strength and frequency of Wi-Fi access points that you see at every point in time as well. And that's a future area I want to dig into to kind of figure that out. It says MAC, but that MAC address isn't a MAC address. It's kind of obfuscated. Google got in trouble for that years ago, right, for driving around picking up MAC addresses and GPS in them and all that stuff with Google Street View, right? So I don't know how exactly to obfuscate this stuff, but I'm sure with enough time I could figure out what my home MAC address is obfuscated to and try to figure out further from there my points I am and everything like that, right? Something cool about the location data too as well is it does some guessing as to what you're doing at that point in time, right? So up here at this data point it says activity, exiting a vehicle, 100% confident of that. It's only 85% confident I might be on foot, right? And so I'll go into some more of this data later and kind of what this means, right? Looking at the source of where they get the location, the geo point for where you are, over 70% of the 2.4 million points comes from Wi-Fi. So think of if that's their database of Wi-Fi points correlated with other things. I don't know exactly how they get that. 20% about is GPS, and then they get cell service as well. So obviously, mapping 2.4 million data points, that's where the fun comes in, right? I like looking at maps and figuring out patterns of life and whatnot. So this kind of lays out maps by different clusters. So you can see, I used to live in the UK, so flying across the ocean, you can see different flight paths you do. And then obviously, where I live. So enhance, zoom in on it. You can see how many data points there are. You can see everywhere I drive. You can, every single time I'm driving, you have an altitude, velocity, and everything for these things, right? So if you start to think about, what could I glean from this sort of data? This shows altitude in meters, I think. So I was like, that's really weird. What are these data points? And at this point in time, I was like, let's dig further into the data. So the first one here on the left, in December, I had a trip to New York, and I noticed if you zoom in on it, you can get accurate enough where you can tell I'm in a hotel, I'm walking down at street level. I'm in a hotel, I'm in the office, I'm in the hotel, I'm in the office. The difference between the hotel and office is my hotel room was on the 44th floor, and my office is on the 21st floor. And so you can actually determine probably the floor people are at. Like in Vegas, I was on the 48th floor of a hotel, and you could tell by altitude what floor I would be at based off your altitude of ground and how many floors and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting when you look at the data for this. On the next one here, skiing. You know, I went to Salt Lake for a work trip here, and I skied in Park City for a few days, and then I was in Salt Lake City, back in Omaha for a little while, and then we went on a trip to Colorado, and you could see throughout my days of skiing up and down as you went up and down the mountain, right? And so you can actually see this level of detail just from this data, you know, and then you're back in flat Nebraska, obviously. And the next bit I wanted to look into was like, what is that activity type, right? So these are kind of some of the things exiting vehicle, in a bus, in a car, in a four-wheeler vehicle. I don't know, that's different than a car, right? Like, what do these things mean? And I haven't looked into this data enough to determine what I was doing at those points in time, because you could select, I know on this day I was doing this, like driving on I-80, I would be in this vehicle. What are all the confidence points in that day and stuff like that, right? So it'd be interesting to see how does it determine, like, there's in a train and these different things, or on a bicycle. So that was in some data points. I think that's something they recently started giving. That was in about half of them. And so speed, you know, if you look at the data points and you look for your activity, which is in a vehicle, what's my average speed on days? And this is in meters per second. So 26 meters per second is about 60 miles an hour. So I looked, and your average speed, you're sitting a lot, but it'd be fun to do analysis and like look at like a stretch of road. How often do you actually follow the speed limit? How often do you do these things, right? And you could look down at the level of detail and get that information, right? And so what, right? So in conclusion, and Google tracks a lot of stuff. I only looked at 5 out of 58 different services they have. You think of YouTube Music, there's everything. If you uploaded music into YouTube Music, you can download that. All of your photos you can get out of there. Just everything. Gmail, all the Gmail searches you do, that's all in there as well. Like, it tracks everything you do in every Google service. This is just the stuff they tell us about, right? And so Apple and others offer similar services to download your data. I don't know how much they track. That's future work for me. I'm not an Apple user, but I'd be interested to see. That's future work. And then what can you do? Nothing, sort of. I mean, they're going to track it and use it, but you can tell Google to not like track, right? In location history, you can turn. So if you want to actually look at this data. And so I guess going along these lines, if Google knows this much about you, make sure your Google account is secure. So what kind of private things can they tell from this going on in your home, going on? So future work, my nerd self, I want to like continue this because it's fun. Normalize more of the data, right? Meters per second doesn't mean much to me. Make it miles per hour. Altitude to feet. Getting other currencies to US dollars. So right now it shows up in the local currency. I'd like to see how much in dollars I spent on that day, so you could type the data in there about how many US. I want to explore the confidence of activity types, like I said. Like on a day where I know I was riding a bike, what did Google think I was doing? On a day I know we were rollerblading, what does Google think I was doing, right? When I would know I was in a car, what did Google think, right? And I want to look more into the Wi-Fi data as well from location history to kind of figure out what that data actually is. So, and tie that to other data sources, like you could look up Wiggle and figure out some different things and try to do that sort of stuff. So basically my quick talk about Google Takeout. Go explore it, look at the data. It's fun to see what's happening. I recommend using Elasticsearch to just get your feet wet in data analysis and looking at this stuff. And just think like in data sets or different data areas, oh, there's a bunch of geodata. what can I learn from that by actually looking at the data and mapping it out, right? Because you can tell a lot just by looking at the data. So that's me for the day, and thank you for coming to KernelCon and my talk. Oh, any questions? Yeah. I will not put my data on GitHub, but I am looking at how I can put the code to ingest that data. I want to make it where you can, because right now you download it, Google can provide you a zip, and then I extract that zip, and then like folders, I do it by folder. I'd like to like, hey, here's a Google Takeout. What data's in there? Okay, pull the data straight out of the zip and do it that way, right? So I want to put up the code in there where you can also clean some of your search history and stuff like that as well if you want to cover certain things up. So there's a reason in code I had collapsed different bits and stuff like that. So yeah, but it is something I want to share. People have done some work on this kind of stuff, but I've never seen it like actually like these different things. It's really interesting. Yep, in the back, Matt. Baby, duh. Yeah, so all of the maps in here, this is all in Kibana, right? So Kibana is part of the Elk Stack, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, and that's just their base map layers, and so it's literally just ingest everything as a geopoint, and then you put all the different JSON documents in there, and you get all that data, like you get all that magic for free, and you can do heat maps, you can do clusters, you can do all sorts of really cool stuff with that. And so all 100% free too. The Elk Stack's free per person. Yeah, and so I know Matt's doing the like right after this talk, right, talking about doing offline like Home Assistant type thing. Forever, and it's like so I used to find people, right, like do intelligence analysis, and it's like somebody wants to find me, they're going to get it. Like Google have my data is the least of my worries, right? So secure your Google account so other people can't get it, because that's your single point of like they have all my data, I better trust that and make sure that my access to it is secure. It's convenience, and I mean that's why anybody uses Facebook. You like the service, right? So I'll give up my private. I mean, I know lots of people. It's like privacy. All right, thanks again, guys. If you want to chat about it, find me.